Okay, cool. Good morning. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on day 2 of Farmer to Farmer PG. That's post Gary. I don't know about you guys. I am still adjusting. But we're gonna do the best we can. Also, I want to apologize just off the bat with this. This is a training that I myself received 2 days ago. So this is very fresh in my mind, and I tried to adjust as much of this as possible from the Feed the Future orientation, drilling down into Farmer to Farmer. That is imperfect, so you will notice that. But yeah, I think that's something we can adjust on the fly as we need to. So, how am I clicking? How do I advance slides?
No, I would use the mouse.
Use the mouse too.
Just click. I think she was gonna do it.
Okay, there we go. Cool. There we go. So originally, this presentation was really dealing with a couple of different things, going into talking points and how to craft effective talking points. Also talking about success stories, which is our main focus today, and going into a little bit of crafting impact statements. So I'm gonna skip through the talking points section. If we wind up with time at the end, that's something that we can delve into a little bit more. But I'm gonna focus the bulk of our time on the success stories, and then if we get through that, we can talk some about crafting communicating the impact as well. That's also where we have the bulk of our activity. We've got some things to sort of play around with there. So I think that'll be useful. And then Q&A, I will do my best with that. You may know I am not a communications specialist. I am your M&E person. So we'll see what we can do with that. But I can always take down questions and refer them to our communications team and get you more information from there. So let's go on to the goals. So in general, we're going to talk about the importance of communication, how that helps us achieve our goals. We're going to talk about how we can shape storylines, both through success stories and just all of our messaging in general, and also how we can get those things down on paper so that we can share them with a broader audience. So in terms of why we're doing this just in general, I think we all know we've got a lot of different audiences that we're trying to communicate with. The way to do this effectively, we want to be telling a story, not just trying to get people to memorize facts. We want to be sharing our messaging so that more people are invested in what we're doing and aware of what we're doing. And we want, once people are invested, we want them to be helping us to advocate for the program. And I think that's true whether we're talking about our audiences here in the US or our audiences in the field. So those are the big things that we're trying to do, and regardless of our role on the program, we should, even when I'm focusing on M&E. So when we're trying to be, when we're putting these stories out, what makes something effective is if we're able to increase awareness. I think that's generally what we're trying to do, but not just awareness of the program itself, but of the impacts that we're having. You know, a criticism or a potential criticism that we hear a lot is that Farmer to Farmer is really volunteered. We do have measurable agricultural impacts, and so that's something I think we need to be keeping in mind as we think about our messaging. We're definitely trying to boost stakeholder engagement and understanding of not just what we do, but of the value. We're trying to build relationships, both here in the U.S. with our stakeholders here, our partners, and our potential volunteers, but also in the field, again, with USAID missions, with our partners on the ground, with our host organizations. And I think Farmer to Farmer, more than a lot of development programs, we have that real focus on public awareness. It's the secondary goal of our program, you know, sharing, increasing public awareness of not only Farmer to Farmer, but of U.S. development efforts generally. So I think that's something we tend to keep in the forefront of our mind, but when we're trying to communicate, doing it effectively is what's going to help us achieve these things. We can hit all those points, but if we're not really telling a story and we're not engaging people as effectively as we could be. So our target audiences here, we brainstormed some of the general audiences, USAID missions, other stakeholders in country, current and potential partners, both in the U.S. and overseas. Sometimes we're engaging with other partners, other interagency partners, U.S. public. I'm sure we're missing some there.
Congress.
Who else are you engaging with? I'm sorry.
Congress.
Congress. You are engaging with Congress. For the record, I am most definitely not.
Yeah.
Who else? Who else are we trying to reach?
I mean, there's a large, I mean, a lot of us are engaging with international public.
Yeah, this is true.
Not a lot of us, all of us.
Yeah.
And other international governments, international NGOs.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, when we talk about the U.S. public, I think we do a lot of work specifically with universities as well, other agribusinesses, that sort of thing. So when we're talking about different audiences, we're going to want to craft our messages slightly differently to be engaging with them and making that sort of personal connection. Not everybody wants to see the same kinds of things. So it's just a thing to think about in our messaging. So when we're talking about our key messages, whether we're, you know, using talking points or an elevator pitch or putting something down in a success story or even talking about how we communicate in our reporting, we want to be making sure that we're communicating what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we stand for, how we're different from other programs. I think that's really easy for farmer to farmer. And then the value that we're bringing. Specifically here, we're talking about the link to global food security, but I think farmer to farmer fits in with a lot of different USG goals. So just thinking about those 4 points, what we do, why we do it, what makes us stand out, and then what's the value, what's the impact, what are we sort of generating as a result of it. So this is the USAID messaging framework. It's a little broader than what we're talking about specifically with farmer to farmer, but I think it definitely still applies. We're supporting U.S. national security and economic prosperity. We're demonstrating American generosity. I think this is an especially easy message for farmer to farmers to convey. And we're also promoting a path to self-reliance and resilience. I think that's something we definitely do. I think everybody's aware of that. We don't always highlight that, I think, in our messaging. So it's an important thing to think about and how well that really ties up into the larger USAID messaging. Oh, and this is the Feed the Future messaging specifically, which I think is interesting. It might not apply quite as directly to what we're doing. We're improving agricultural production and markets. We're strengthening resilience. We're increasing food security and improving nutrition and increasing the exchange of ideas, technologies, and products. So these aren't things that we necessarily have to make sure that we're hitting in all of our communications pieces for farmer to farmer, but I think this is a useful thing. I considered just pulling the slide, and then I thought, all right, you know what, especially as we're starting new programs, thinking about our stakeholders in the mission and how we can demonstrate our value. And how we can help tie in with some of the other programming and activities that they're doing. I think these things are not necessarily quite as intuitive for the things that we do with farmer to farmer, but I think we actually are hitting most of those boxes. So that may be useful messaging to think about when your audience is USAID missions or other USAID partners. So now we're going to start moving into success stories specifically, but before we get there, I want everybody to take a minute and think about what your favorite stories are. So from books or movies or like podcasts, what do you enjoy listening to or reading or watching? What do you come back to again and again and again? So take a minute, and then I'm going to ask people to shout out some sharing there. Do you have anybody on the phone who wants to share about your favorite story? Anybody whose microphone is working?
Erin, I can
Yeah.
share. This is Chelsea.
Hey,
How are
Chelsea.
you?
Story.
One of my favorite stories is from Kyrgyzstan 2008, so a long time ago.
Okay.
I was not involved with Farmer to Farmer at the time, but went out there to support Farmer to Farmer on a final report. So I was capturing some stories, and one of my favorite ones was talking to a group of women farmers who had learned all sorts of ways to maintain their cherry trees, so pruning and composting and like other stuff like identifying pests. So they were telling me all about it, and they were telling me how they increased their incomes, and I asked what are you doing with your increased incomes, and we're like, oh well, we're getting our daughters married. So now they were able to invest in their household, but then they said, oh yeah, and we also bought a vehicle, like all of us together. So now we don't use the middleman. We just take our stuff to the market directly. So I really like that.
Yeah. So what is it that you find so compelling about that story? Like, what really grabs you and makes that stick in your mind 10 years later?
I know it's been 10 years and I still think about it.
Yeah.
One is that they found a way to invest back in their farming business. To now they're cutting costs by not relying on the middleman, but doing them themselves. But also I realized that the dowry for their daughters was important for them, for the family, and maybe they were having problems like getting that together before. Now they didn't. Now that was not a problem anymore. So maybe from a societal standpoint, also meant that they were better off in their communities and what that means from a cultural perspective, not just like the financial economics side.
So it sounds like there's improvement, and that's really compelling. But there's also sort of a personal connection there. It means something to a family.
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else wanna share a story from Farmer to Farmer or any place else really that you find really compelling? Virginia?
So I think, yeah, the stories that, I mean, obviously that you can see, tangible improvement in farmers' lives overseas in the programs, but then also to see volunteers that it's impacted so deeply. I know all of us have worked with volunteers that are constantly posting on Facebook, and they're, and it's not just Facebook, right? They are educating everyone in their networks about the places they've been, the things they've learned, introducing them to new cultures and people that, like I think about Andy Shackelford, who was one of the volunteers of the year a few years ago, and he still stays connected with a lot of the people he met in Zambia. He's always talking about it, in his community in North Carolina, people that have never, like, where is Zambia, where, know nothing about it, and he's still, like, constantly educating people through, his farmer to farmer experience, and that's just, one volunteer. I mean, you think about all of them, and those kind of stories, I think, are really compelling too.
So that personal connection makes a real difference there.
Yeah.
Okay. These are good examples. So if we think about what makes a compelling story, there are different components to that. So a lot of what we talked about here were stories that appeal to hearts and minds. So there's an authenticity to someone's personal story, and that specificity helps make a connection. We also, I think, a lot of our stories are designed to engage someone and then influence them, get them to act in some way or think about something differently. And we also think about how our stories make connections. So this is a good place to be thinking about specifically who our audiences are. What are our audience's values? What's important to our audience? And how can we make that connection between what we're doing and what our audiences care about? A lot of times when we think about effective stories, they center on tension or turning points. So you see a change, or you see how some sort of pressure results in a specific outcome. So you think about, we've got David and Goliath there, little guy versus big guy, and how you can make a difference there. How, if there are two paths diverging, and how making a choice there, or having the opportunity to make a choice, makes a difference for someone overcoming adversity, or having an epiphany. These are narratives that tend to be, I think, really, really compelling to people. And when we think about crafting a story or a message, we can tie into those narratives to help make our storytelling more effective. So when we talk about sharing our success stories, and what stories we choose to capture and share, we want to make sure that, the activities are important, but we want to focus on the outcomes. So we need to contextualize things. Most of the time our audiences aren't incredibly immersed in the specifics of the stories that we're trying to tell. So we need some context. We need to talk about what we're doing and those activities there. But we really want to start, lay that out quickly, and then start driving the story toward what the benefits are, how that impacts people and communities. We want to be trying to make a connection. All those stories that Virginia and Chelsea shared talked about connections. So that's what we're trying to do: connect our audience to our work, and generate interest and excitement and engagement in what we're doing. So yeah, these are the kinds of things we want to be thinking about with what we choose to share, and then how we craft those stories that we're sharing. So this is something you might remember from your high school literature classes. Effective stories tend to have some exposition, rising action. There's something happening, and we know it's coming to a point. That point is the climax. Then there's some resolution, and then sort of the result, or the final outcome there. So that when we can tap into familiar arcs like that, it really helps our audience understand and follow what we're saying. So you can get more information across with fewer words, if you're following a story pattern that's familiar. Or another example of that is just start with the problem, talk about the solution, and then lay out the impact. So this is sort of a simplified version of the same thing. It's a little less narrative this way, depending on how you're trying to tell a story. But those are sort of the three pieces that we expect to see in a success story, whether we're looking for those words specifically, or if it's just intuitive. We want to know what the issue is, how we address that issue, and then what the results were. We should also, if we go back to that, I tend to think of that as kind of a pyramid. So a little bit on the problem, some more on the solution, big on the impact. So this is someplace where I forgot to update the slide. Let's tell farmer-to-farmer success stories. When we're telling these stories, we want to make sure that we're compelling. We don't want to pick something that's really boring and blasé. Let's find something that's really going to be able to grab somebody's interest and attention. Make sure that we're mentioning USAID, that we're giving some basic context for farmer to farmer, and including some of those key messages. We want to make sure, we've talked about this a lot, but focusing on that positive impact. That's really what we want to be conveying. And then as much as possible, have a human element to the story. I think that's particularly easy with farmer to farmer, but we can, we're always telling a story about a volunteer in a host organization, but if we can personalize those things with quotes, with pictures that really make that connection clear. We always have some sort of human element, but the more personal we can make that, I think it's one of the real strengths of farmer to farmer. So here's a place, if you look in your packet, and for those of you on the phone, I can't remember the name of this file. Which one is this? I'll send it again right now. Yeah, you should already have this, but it's basically our communications team took, these are not farmer to farmer examples, but they took two different success stories that had been submitted by partners. And they have an original version that they presented to us, or that they shared with us here, and then they rewrote it to sort of focus things a little bit more. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing here, but just take a minute and sort of glance through that and see, take a look at the kinds of things that we highlighted there. So what are you guys noticing that's different between the two different versions of that first story there?
Second one's more punchy, shorter paragraphs.
Yeah.
It also leaves that, I think, kind of way, certainly the either problem.
Solution, impact. Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes that story arc a little bit more clear too. I think you're right. Yeah. One of the other things I think the second version does is, this story is really nice because it's got so many quotes in it. And I think the second version pulls out some of the explanation and just lets the community's voices speak for themselves, which is really, really nice. It doesn't wind up being tremendously shorter, but it really, it gets the information across more efficiently, I think, and more effectively because it's making that connection. Yeah. One of the other things this does is, if you look at the final version down at the end, they pulled a lot of the key messaging out into just a brief paragraph at the bottom. So you don't have to, lay that out all at the beginning, which sort of distracts. It's not immediately compelling right at the beginning of the story.
Right away.
Exactly. Yeah. So by pulling that out into the end, and with the italic text, it sort of highlights it. This is a little separate from the story, but it lets you launch into the story and grab people's attention right away. Did anybody get to the second one? No, go ahead, Virginia.
Oh, I was just going to say, so my favorite quote in here, which you were just saying, letting the quotes stand for themselves. This one on the little sixth paragraph. Now, if it is his wife's turn to water the garden and she's not available, a husband will take care of the job, Kadari said. That's so, all of a sudden you see there's change in the community where the men are stepping up to support their wives if they, can't on that day go to the garden. So their commitment to this new initiative, and, the original is talking about, the men realize the importance of support. You don't need any of that. That quote is just super powerful, so let it be.
You're able to convey so much information with just one line. Yeah.
I think also we can sometimes be guilty of trying to throw in the names of the projects, the names of all the partners, the names of everything else right in the beginning as an explanatory background bit, but I think that loses people's interest. So they've taken out a lot of what outsiders might consider jargon, like the mention of wash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Eric?
There's the before story, there's the techniques of writing a proposal and the techniques of writing a success story are different. And in the before story, you see some of the proposal writing of okay, first we did this, and then we did this, and then the community bought in this way, and there was WASH, and there was all these acronyms. And that's, okay, that can get you a good proposal, but it's boring.
Yeah.
And telling a story and being interesting is the second one.
Yeah, you got to put on a different hat. Yeah. No, that's excellent. Anything else on the first one here?
I also think it's a little better branded for Feed the Future. Feed the Future was tossed in there a couple more times rather than just the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking about sort of like the bigger picture there. I think you can tell the first one was written by an implementer, and the second one is the Feed the Future communications team took that and made an adjustment there. And it's fine to have that information available, but it's not really capturing your audience. So throwing that in at the end, I think you can still get the point across to people for whom that's important, but you're not really distracting from your resources. Did anybody get to the second one here? One of the things about the final version, I feel like in this one, it didn't translate tremendously well to print. I think this is a website example, and the graphics on that really kind of wound up overwhelming the text. This one with all the text boxes.
This is Diana. I was going to say, I found that the second one was a bit more concise. And the other thing that stood out for me was that they separated the quote about, for my products, I made sales of about $41. And it was an eye-opener. But just by separating it and making it a standalone sentence, it brought more attention to it.
Oh, yeah.
Which made it stand out even more for me as the reader.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But
I'm sorry, going back to the question.
Oh, okay.
It tells you all of the kilos of all the things that it doesn't tell you the time frame.
Oh, that's true.
You don't get a sense of how long it takes for them to achieve all of that.
Yeah. That's a good point.
It was over a year.
Yeah.
Particular growing season.
Yeah, that's true.
As of November.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's when we can throwing some sort of time marker in there, I think helps us make the case that this is an incredible result. There's an example later in the packet that when I took this course, I was like elbowing my neighbor. Those are great results. They took 10 years. Did you notice that? If you don't, I don't know. Maybe that's why they didn't put a year marker in here. But I think we can either increase or we can increase our credibility if we can say, over 2 growing seasons or something like that. Yeah. It's something specific that's meaningful to people. Or, you can really decrease your credibility if you have incredible results over 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
$100,000.
One of the sort of funny things I like about this second example, we talk about trying to make a personal connection in a lot of our stories. I think the original version of this can get a little bit too personal. Talking about the beneficiary's rash, which that's definitely an impact. It was effective in helping her clear up a rash, but that might be a little bit too personal and not really be hitting the sort of things that we're trying to get to. So, yeah, just trying to figure out how to calibrate things more effectively. Anything else about this second one? So if we go on from these examples, we have an activity, which I think is kind of fun. Could we get those materials out to you?
I'll send it through again, just so everyone has.
So what we've got for this, we have, I'm going to ask people to break up into either pairs or small groups. We've got a lot of different versions of these materials here. So we have 2 different puzzles, basically. Examples of success stories, real life success stories that have been broken down into a couple of sentences each. And so with your partner or small group, we'll pass these out and take them and put them in order. Figure out how you would tell that story. You may not want to use all of the specific pieces, so feel free to discard those, but take the different components and tell a compelling story with that. So we've got 2 different examples. We'll pass these out. Here, let's send these down this side of the room, and we'll send these down this side. So take a look as you grab one of these. There's story number 1 and story number 2. So let's start with story number 1, and grab a partner or a couple of people, and just start working on that. Let's take like maybe 15 minutes to go through it. All right. Yeah. So, do we have anybody on the phone who wants to read out their story? Anybody? Anybody in the room who wants to read out their story? Excellent. Okay, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
And read loud so the mic picks you up.
Will do. Joshua Oyugi is a farmer in Tirango village in western Kenya, where he farms beans, cassava, sweet potato, banana, and most importantly, maize. In Kenya, maize is everything. For about 96% of Kenyans, it's a major source of carbohydrates and provides more than a third of their daily calories. Kenya faces a serious maize shortage due in part to a drought and in part to government policies that have exacerbated shortages. Farmers like Uyugi also face a challenging climate. Maize farmers at this altitude struggle to increase their yields when few, if any, improved maize varieties at local dealers are tailored for the local weather and ecological conditions. From 2013 to 2015, a Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Assets and Market Access, AMA Innovation Lab research team tested whether hybrid maize seeds tailored for Kenya's mid-altitude regions could increase both yields and income for small-scale farmers like we. About 1,200 farmers in Kenya's former Western and Nyanza provinces took part in the AMA Innovation Lab randomized controlled trial. Farmers in the treatment group received Western seed, 250-gram trial seed packets, and the options to purchase full bags to be delivered to their homes. Across all farmers, higher yields were common. For farmers who had the options to purchase hybrid seeds, yields were about 40% higher compared to farmers who did not. For Feed the Future's efforts have increased maize productivity by 65% for smallholder households from 2013 to 2016. The Feed the Future strategy will help people in Kenya to transform farming into business and spur the growth that will enable the country to reach its ambition of becoming a middle-income country by 2030. And then at the end, we put the reference source website.
Cool. Yeah. Thoughts, reactions?
This is better.
Yep.
How do you guys feel about that?
Kind of bogged down in knowledge on it.
Yeah. Okay.
And I will say, we took out there's a lot of background that we didn't use.
Yeah.
We take out a lot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to go with like the brief background to give the context, the challenge with the climate and the yields and everything. And the project comes in with this solution, this test and solution, and indeed it is a solution. It worked. So hooray. And then a little bit about, the Feed the Future's goals.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that hits the arc. You talk about the problem, you make a personal connection with a farmer, then you go into the solution. This is the activity that the project undertook, and then here are the results. This is how this is working, and then you tied it into a larger goal. Let's go on to the next slide there. Oh, we can slide through a couple actually. This is so there's a solution. Next one. There we go. So this is what the communications team put together. It's very similar to what you have. There are a couple of slight changes there. So it does the same thing, making that connection with the farmer right at the beginning, explaining the importance and why they're facing this problem. It goes briefly into the solution, and then it's a little briefer on the outcomes than you guys were. It doesn't really tie it back into the larger farmer-to-farmer context, but
your example, their example here is the exact opposite. It's the reverse of the pyramid.
Oh yeah. It's really heavy on the problem there. I think the difference. So I think what really bulks this out is trying to make that connection with the personal connection with the farmer. That adds to that some. But you're right. It is really, really heavy on the problem.
And that's why we took out the one that has a low maize productivity varies today only blah, blah, blah hectare, and this, like, we didn't use that one in ours because we felt that was just, it was too in the weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
We took that
also,
out.
when I did this earlier this week, we took out the Kenya faces a serious maize shortage due in part to drought and in part to government policies, because that doesn't get picked up anywhere else in the story. That just seems like kind of extraneous information, and I don't know. I don't like offending government, so.
Drought, and we could split it because the drought would like relate to climate stuff, but it was all in the same strip.
Yeah.
So it was like both are done.
Another sort of criticism I have of this one is, although maize productivity varies today, only 1.8 tons per hectare is realized against the potential of 6 tons per hectare. You could also just say, it has the potential to increase by production by 300% or something.
Yeah.
And make that a little pithier there. So there are definitely some things you can do there, but in general, I think you hit it with let's lay out the problem, make a personal connection, talk about the solution, talk about the impact and how that impacts somebody personally. So, and ideally you'd have a picture and some quotes. So let's take a look at the second one now, and do the same thing. Let's take maybe 10 minutes with that one. And yeah, folks on the phone, hopefully you're not having too much trouble working with this. Hopefully PowerPoint makes it a little easier.
Puzzle 2.
Shall we come back together now? Everybody at least partially satisfied with what you've got here?
Yeah.
I think this one was a little. Yeah, this one was. I agree with you. I think this one was definitely more challenging. So I'm gonna offer it up to folks on the phone again. Anybody want to read a success story?
Well, I got all self-conscious when you said the word of workshop.
Right.
Anybody?
You have to get to work.
Bueller? Anybody in the room want to read a success story?
We can read ours. It's short and sweet.
Excellent.
Okay. Kimberly is a third grade student and school government member of Itzak School in the Cunan municipality in rural Guatemala. As it is for most children in rural Guatemala, water is a scarce resource for Kimberly and her family. Only 18% of households have access to piped water in their homes. Among those homes, 90% do not have water that is safe enough to drink. Given the lack of water at home, schools play a critical role in ensuring children have access to functional water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities, which are a necessary step to creating healthy schools and improving nutrition. Through Feed the Future, the USDA McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Investment for Educational Development in the Highlands, or IDEA, project is working to improve student health and hygiene practices in school. The program is implemented by Save the Children. In addition to providing daily school meals to more than 42,000 students in 273 schools, the program includes training to school staff in essential hygiene skills to prevent contamination of food and infrastructure improvements to school communities like water filters for classrooms and school kitchens, sanitation facilities, and hand washing stations. They're also focused on training students like Kimberly to be leaders and active participants in the health of their schools. All students learn and practice personal hygiene in schools, including hand washing with soap and oral hygiene. Kimberly follows the cleanliness traffic light method, which consists of student-led inspections to publicly monitor, track, and report the hygiene conditions in school. We check the cleanliness of the classrooms, bathrooms, patio, kitchen, cellar, and hallways, Kimberly said. We put green, happy faces in the areas that are clean and red, sad faces in places that need to be cleaned. Before, there were more sad faces, but now almost all the faces are happy. The program has helped thousands of students in Guatemala on the path to better health and hygiene by allowing kids to build healthy habits, and student leadership creates positive reinforcement by building social norms around hygiene.
Beautiful.
And
reactions? Devastating criticisms? You can start. Yeah, any other thoughts?
I didn't know how USAID could be possibly put into the story.
Oh, that's
There's
true.
so much background on the USAID, like what USAID's done in these countries. And yeah, so.
Yeah, the one that sort of goes into, okay, Feed the Future, here's 14 lines on the name of this program. That I think could definitely be adjusted a little bit to to sort of refocus on sort of the critical things that we want to mention, like, hey, this is a USAID program, or something like that, and just sort of make that connection. Yeah.
I think we ended up taking out all the mentions of USAID.
Yeah. We tried to, but we didn't know.
We thought we'd go with one program.
Yeah. I think this is one of those kinds of stories where you could really get a lot of mileage out of making just a little block of text at the end explaining.
Oh, yeah.
This one was tricky too, because I think there's a lot of reference to the program, but the explanation of the program is mostly just the name.
Yeah.
So, and then there's that reference to Colgate Palmolive, which, like, what exactly is going on here? So I think there's definitely some tricky things in that one. I would probably rewrite some of these slides, not just reorder them. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one?
I wanted to include the Colgate Palmolive thing, like all of this, working with the private sector and everything, but it just wasn't framed right for this.
Yeah, the only mention of that is just, and here's a giveaway, which
that would have needed a little more
story in it. Yeah,
that makes it a little hard. There we go. Yeah, this is the way the communications team put it, which is close to what you had. But yeah, I would probably do some things a little differently here as well.
Oh, they kept the Palmolive in.
Where do they put the? Oh, it's in the. Okay.
The longitudinal analysis has been removed.
They took out the longitude. Well, they did it wrong.
No. The longitudinal analysis is boring enough. I'd stop reading.
So I think what they're trying to do by including the Colgate Palmolive donation in the outcome is, I think we're probably missing a little bit of information about how they made that connection with that public-private partnership. That could very well be an outcome of the activity, but just with the information we've got here, I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Yep.
Well, it's also, I'm sure it's waving the flag for pulling in private sector, U.S. private sector.
That's true. It's a weird fit there. So I think there's also an option, thanks Steve, there's a discussion here about Kimberly follows the cleanliness traffic light method, but then she explains it herself in a quote. So we may be able to take out our own explanation of that and just let her quote stand for itself. So there are some options to mess with these things here. One of the things that I like about both of these examples that it sounds like I think everybody also pulled up in putting those stories together is that we start by making a personal connection and then sort of broaden that out to a larger community or a region, and then focus that back in on the on that personal connection. Another thing I like in this one, they're focused on training students like Kimberly. Like, you could lose some focus in the meat of the story on that personal connection, and they just do a really nice subtle drawback to remember who you know and how this affects this specific person, which I think is a nice element in this one. So that's what we have specifically on the success stories. If we want to move on, we have one more activity with some material in your packets. So I can't remember the name of this file, but I think you shared it. So there should be one more thing in here. It's about a 6-page file, I guess, three pages in hard copy. And what this does is these are things maybe we can work with a partner or individually on this, however you wanna do it. But it lays out sort of a development challenge the project solution, and then includes a bunch of statements on impact. And what the purpose of this is just sort of think about what are the important things to pull out for impact statements, what are the things that are going to be most relevant, and then how can we phrase that or frame it in a way that's most likely to connect to our audience. So read the challenge for each of these, read the solution, read through those different impact statements, pick which ones you want to highlight.
Which impact statements you want to highlight.
Which impact statements you want to highlight, and then either record those verbatim or reword those or rephrase those in a way that that's going to help communicate most directly with your audience. So like I said, either work with a partner on this or do them individually, however that makes the most sense to you. But let's take maybe 5 to 10 minutes to read through these and write some impact statements.
So are we doing all of them, or as many as we can get through right
now? Yeah, there are, I think, 5.
Okay.
2, 4, 5, yeah.
I have another question.
Yes.
Do you want us to rewrite the whole story in the answer box?
No, just the impact. Just do 2 or 3 impact statements. What are the highlights from this, and how would I present that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's start sharing some examples here. So the Dev Bar rice mill. Does anybody have a few pithy impact statements they're willing to share? So somebody has to, or you're going to have to listen to mine from earlier this week, which were terrible. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
I just compacted it into one sentence. As a result, a local food company selected Dev Bar Rice Mill to thresh 200 metric tons of paddy rice in 2017, therefore reducing rice imports from India by 30%.
Yeah, beautiful. That really compresses the information. You hit the main points really quickly. A couple of things that you might want to pull out here too. They're feeding nearly twice as many people. That might be a good thing that you could pull out without having to. I mean, all those numbers are kind of the larger the numbers are, the less our brain has context for those. So trying to think of a way to like compress that down, like the 30% is something that we understand. It's one of the challenges I think we get with farmer to farmer is a lot of times that we're talking about, hey, number of people trained, we've reached this many people, which is definitely an impact. But it's hard to, when I did this earlier this week, absolutely no one pulled out 1,000 farmers trained, and I was like, that's what we do all the time. But it's hard to really make that super compelling. So being able to think about 100 farmers or 1,000 farmers receive training, which helped the plant have a steadier supply of high quality rice for milling or things like that. Thinking about how we might be able to read it.
Isn't that, I mean, the training of thousands of farmers, that's more of like the output.
Yeah.
Right, leading to what? You trained them, so what?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a challenge we get all the time with extension activities as well, things that are doing capacity building. It doesn't necessarily get us all the way to the end of the chain. So whenever we are able to collect that information about, what happened as a result of that, that's a lot more compelling if we can get there. It's not a problem to highlight those numbers, but just sort of completing the chain there. So what? So, yeah, which, significantly reducing the imports is a significant so what there. Awa fish. Anybody want to read an example there? There we go.
This partnership with MCC gave Iowa Fish the foundation they needed to thrive, and in the span of 6 years, they were able to more than double their storage capacity and increase their line of credit to $160,000.
Beautiful. So taking all of that information, with a ton of numbers, and just compressing it down into something that's a little easier to understand, doubling line of credit, doubling storage capacity. We've got, there's a lot of information there. There are, 5 different bullet points, and what's most important and how can we communicate that most effectively. I probably would have included the quote as well, just because it helps tell a story, and bring back that personal connection. But one of the other odd things in this one, I thought too, let's see, the 4th bullet point there, it's great that this business has established better terms with their suppliers. But the way it's written right now, it really sounds like they're just sticking it to the fishing families, like, haha, we'll buy from you, but only if you lower your prices, which a lot of times they're trying to focus on the smallholders. And it's great that somebody else is getting more better terms out of this, but are we screwing over the little guy in the meantime? So think about how we're presenting everything there. I don't think that's necessarily that could be a useful impact of the project. Maybe they've got lower prices but a steadier buyers. So it's not necessarily that they're decreasing household income for the fishing families, but we want to just think about like the whole picture, what we're presenting there. Agrohoven? Anybody read anything for that one? This is another one where there are a lot of sort of output figures there. A lot of people are trained. A lot of people are forming groups. But so what? What are we doing as a result? Yeah, the example. It's not really short and pithy, but but what the communications team pulled out here was. With support from Feed the Future and Mercy Corps, the Agrohoven Project has equipped more than 500 young adults in Guatemala with the knowledge, financial means, and relationships necessary to create and sustain successful farms. This project has ultimately enabled these young adults to stay and work in Guatemala instead of having to move to another country to find success. As Agrohoven participant Judith Morales Manzar notes, what I want to say to the world and to all the youth is that here in Guatemala we can obtain the things we want without having to move to another country. So yeah, picking out the most important impacts from that list they've got there, bring it back to the personal connection at the end. Tajikistan Health and Nutrition. Anybody want to read a statement? Eric, yeah, read a statement.
This isn't really a full statement, but this is how I'd start with this is, the project provided mold sketches and training, which led to the training of 18 masons, one of whom was Gafurov, who then used his money to go to school and is now sharing the information with his customers.
There you go. Yeah. So pulling out those key pieces, making a through line through from the problem to the solution to what the results are. What the example we've got is Feed the Future's health and nutrition activity has benefited the community in multiple ways. In addition to improving hygiene through the construction of new sanitary latrines, individual entrepreneurs like Gafurov have learned new skills that allowed them to start a small business and pursue higher education. So yeah, making that connection all the way through, talking about the results. Anybody get all the way through to the Nepal example?
Yeah, I did.
Everybody want to read yours?
Yeah. With the help of the program and the community support, Chipang families increased food security and nutrition of the food supply for the community, as well as women
and children, the most vulnerable groups in the community. The sale of the agriculture products also generated more income for these indigenous families.
There you go. Yeah. So highlighting those community members, specifically highlighting the most vulnerable, incomes, nutrition, and increased food. So we're hitting all the pieces there. Yeah. Well done, guys. So this is right at the end of what we have. If we go back over to the slideshow. There we go. So just to summarize what we talk about when we're trying to communicate and tell a story, whether that's talking with somebody about the program and the impacts we have, or actually putting that down on paper in a success story. Try to create a personal connection and an emotional connection. Not just appealing to talking about numbers, but how does this personally affect someone? That it helps pull the viewer into the story and think about how make that personal connection there. Basically, talk about real people, quote them, use pictures that again help to make that a little bit more personal. Try to avoid our industry-specific jargon or a lot of acronyms. If there are things that are really important, we can pull some of that out into the end of the story, so we don't get in our own way right at the beginning. When we think about it's a problem that I think Farmer to Farmer runs into a lot, where so much of what we do is training or capacity development or sort of hands-on experience. And how do you talk about those things in a way that's going to be resonant for someone who doesn't do this every day, which is a real challenge. But avoid that whenever we can. Think about not just the volunteer trained people, 500 people. Talk about the specific skills that the volunteer trained them in, or what they got as a result of that, rather than just saying training. Talk about sustainable change. Talk about how that impact affects a group of people, how that will make them, help them not just in the immediate future, but longer term, even if their circumstances change, and what action people have taken as a result of the work that we've done. And then, when we're using photographs, make sure we're including a caption. We don't always get those in success stories. Always good to have a photo credit and to make sure that we have permission from the people that we're featuring in our stories. So that's important. And when we include, the pictures are really important to include. Try to make sure when we include pictures that we're showing action. It's great to have pictures of people learning, but it's not always super super compelling to see a bunch of people in a classroom. So whenever you can, pictures in the field are always better than pictures in a when that makes sense. When we're presenting numbers are great, but we need to have some context for that. Like Cersei said earlier, putting years on things, that's helpful. But we have to have an anchor for that, not just, by 2018, but over a 2-year period or something like that. That helps us make sense of that. Talking about context and scale for those numbers. Dollar amounts are great. That's important. But it's not the most important impact. We want to try to make that human. The other thing is, when the example we talked about earlier, $41 is a huge impact for the woman who is selling moringa products. For the average American, $41 probably isn't going to be super compelling. So if we want to talk about that, it's a fine number to include, but we want to make sure we've got context for that. Or talk about a percentage. This is a 400% increase in her income, rather than the specific dollar amounts are sometimes hard to scale. When, it's good to make a story personal and talk about a specific example, but we want to make sure that that's not a dramatic outlier. There's a reason we don't see a ton of success stories about flex assignments, because those are often great assignments, but it's not necessarily exemplary of the wider project. So make sure that when we're pulling out stories to talk to people about, there's a that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. There's more behind that. It's not just a one-off example. And then, acronyms and industry-specific jargon, avoid that when we can. And if we do need to include acronyms, try to move those in a way where it's not going to present those in a way where it's not going to stop the action in your story dead. So I think that's it. Yeah. If you have questions that I can either answer or refer to someone else. Maria.
So as we think about these two examples, the healthy schools in Guatemala and the maize in Kenya, who would you think that this would be our audience for these?
Yeah.
And can you briefly touch upon, if we're tailoring something for USAID mission versus the U.S. public audience, how you might adapt things like the degree of acronyms or the amount of context needed or things like that?
Yeah. So I think one of the so the examples in those two activities, I think, are really similar to the examples in the other handout that we talked about first, where the first cut of that was, I think, written by an implementing partner for a USAID audience. And then the improved version, those two examples, and then the examples you put together with those puzzles are sort of broadening that audience. So when things are coming directly to USAID, usually we understand the jargon or the acronyms, and so we probably have a larger appetite for that than any other audience you're going to encounter. That's not necessarily a good thing. A lot of times, and I've sort of slowed down with this, but earlier in the program, I was feeding a lot more of our success stories into our Feed the Future communication team. And what I always got back from them was, I don't know these acronyms. If you want us to share these things, you're going to have to reframe this and explain a lot more of that material. So even when you're sending things to USAID, we might have a higher appetite for those things. But in order to reach a wider audience, which is really what, even when you send things to me, that's ultimately what I want to do. I want to be able to share that with other people. So that's the first thing we're going to have to change before we can move that on. So I would say avoid that just in general, even if I'm your audience or the mission or anything like that is your audience. When we talk about the U.S. public, that they're going to have even less of an appetite for that than if you're trying to push things out into like an industry publication or something. That's going to be way different than something that we're trying to get up on a USAID mission website. Or if you're just generally pushing something out through Facebook, I think strip out as much of that as you can. And that's not necessarily going to be a problem for me when I see those things. I'm still going to see the story. So I would err on the side of less project specificity and more general interest, because I'm going to understand that either way, and it's going to be easier to share if it's more general interest. Yeah. Bruce?
It's all these things are a balancing act. I guess a couple of things that come to mind is that the personal stories can be kind of a cliche. And I still remember, I don't watch many movies, but I remember watching All About Schmidt way back when. And Deer and Dougal, he responded to one of his like Save the Children letters or something like that. And anyway, it became this big joke all the way through the movie. And so you can, when I see it actually with CRS, outside of the Farmer program, that's a little bit too much of that. And also, I think it's also important to not insult people's intelligence. And make them too fluffy, because also it gets back to some of the negative reputation that Farmer has. It's fluff, whereas we do meaningful things, and I think that it's important, if we can kind of strip out some of the jargon and the acronyms and things like that, to really tell that story. Because these are compelling stories, and we really do make a big difference. but I guess for us not to be afraid to really explain some things that are more complex.
Fair enough. I think a lot of times when we talk about making a story personal, we tend to think about we have to highlight one person, whether that's a beneficiary or a host or a volunteer. But like in the first example that we talked about, that told a very personal story about a village and had a lot of different people in that village sharing their perspective. So I think there are different ways to do that without, there definitely is a cliche and a template to, here's this person, here was their problem, look at the miracle we made, and now they're going to school, So there are different ways to make that personal connection without falling back on those kinds of things. Yeah, and things are more complex.
So when I was hearing what you're saying, the stories are not only for us to show what we have done, what are the results, but also increase the awareness of the readers and also impact them, right? So what I was thinking is that when I go through these stories we have, I don't really see what is going to happen in the future. It's more about what happened and probably what is happening right now, not what can be done or what can be what we can do about this. So, what do you think about this? We can actually add some ideas, we could do more things in the future for this village or for this community,
or
because the readers want to know how they can impact or how can they, contribute.
Yeah. I think there's the possibility to like in the example with Tajikistan, as a result of what we've done, this gentleman before us is pursuing higher education, which is great. Do we know what he's doing with that? Is that connected at all to his business, or what is he going to do as a result of how does that tie into the story at all? That's useful. That's great. I'm really happy for him. But how is that tying in? Whereas when we're talking about the story of the fish business, I can't remember which country that was from. The entrepreneur who was making all of these changes, I feel like there's a little bit more of a story arc into the future. She has a line of credit now. This is what she's doing with it. This is how she's expanding her business. And so I have more of a picture of what she's doing and what she will continue to do as a result of what the project helped her start on. When we look for farmer to farmer hosts, we're looking for people who generally I feel like we're looking for organizations that need a boost but have a trajectory and a vision for where they're going. And we have a real opportunity. I think you're right. I think we don't do it very often to show that trajectory. This is one piece, but where are they going as a result?
And I think that's not just farmer to farmer, that's just the development community in general. Projects are 5 years long, and how can we know for sure what's going on, 2, 3, 4 years later? And I think also, maybe just in general, being mindful of these kinds of things and taking opportunities when folks are traveling or there's, you're working on another project nearby, those kind of things. Maybe if you've worked on stories before, is there time in my schedule to do a quick follow-up or a call or an email or, and trying to tease out some of those, impacts maybe. Because it is, that's one of the frustrating things in general, I think.
But being able to demonstrate that is only going to get more important because it's very important to the administrator, it's very important to the administration that we're encouraging self-reliance and working, I hate this cliche, but working ourselves out of a job. And
I think an advantage with farmer to farmer is you have the volunteers. So programs are 5 years, but a lot of those volunteers stay in contact for so many years afterwards. They go back, so it can show a much longer trajectory. The story is where it's 10, 20 years later.
They may know so much more than we do about the host. So maybe that's something that's going, polling, doing more of those polls with volunteers.
Yeah.
So you say like we should go back and track those volunteers, like what they're doing now, like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like think that having the larger community, showing the benefits of the larger community helps to promote that trajectory.
Yeah.
Because it's the whole community versus just one person.
Yeah.
I used to work with a group for child sponsorship.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they switch their approach to not only benefit the child that had a sponsor, but also the community at large where the child was located, it was so much more meaningful. And more sponsors wanting to do that because it's when only the child community gets the education, the health care, and the other children did not have it. It was, and everybody was trying to get a child benefit from that.
Yeah.
It was a real struggle for the community. It was like, even for myself, like I can't reconcile with this. I'm choosing only specific children with specific criteria and vulnerable, and stuff. But when the programs really changed to include the community with a team development project rather than child being sponsored, it was just much better.
Yeah. So it's good to put a face so people can make connections, but you also have to have that wider story. One of the when Gary and I presented the midterm results from Farmers, one of the big criticisms we got, which is it's midterm, but overall for the program over the first 3 years, we saw a pretty resounding decrease in income. and so trying to take a look at the balance between what the program costs and what the ultimate impacts are, that can be a tricky proposition, especially when we're working with small farmers. And the correct response to that is, well, yeah, that's what it looks like this year, but what's it going to look like next year and the year after that and the year after that? And if you compound all those results, yeah, this is a really, you get a really good value for your money, especially if you're looking at 5-year impacts, not 3-year impacts. Come on. But if we can tell that story about, like, hey, this is where this business or this village or this individual is right now, but this is where they're going as a result of the work that we're doing and the tools that they have to continue. The whole, we're not giving out fish, we're giving people fishing poles and teaching them how to use them. So making that connection to the longer term impacts, I think that's a really good thing. Yeah.
I think we're just past 11:30.
Wow.
Yep. Time flies.
Yeah. Any last minute comments, questions, devastating criticisms? Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin, for coming in and not only giving this training, but turning it around and making it farmer to farmer relevant in such a short period of time.
That's right.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming, guys. Yeah. And I know everything's winding down, but I'm around. So if anything comes up, definitely feel free to reach out, and we'll be in touch. Yeah. Thanks, and thanks to everybody calling in on the phone.
Thanks, Aaron.